Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host, teacher and socialist Andy Lipson, and community organizer and socialist Kenny Cepeda. We are online at what-s-left.webnode.com. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode wherever you found this episode. Thank you. Today, we're excited to have our very own Alison McDowell, once again, contributor to What's Left, also a mother and independent researcher in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, who blogs at the intersection of race, finance, and technology at Wrenching the Gears. We'll link to your blog in the episode notes, Alison. And as I'll just do a reminder for folks to remember, Alison began her effort and into looking in depth at the slow privatization of public education and fighting standardized testing in public education, and which slowly evolved into an investigation of globalized poverty management, euphemistically known as social impact investing. And she has spent years researching into predatory educational technologies, harvesting the new oil, which is data. And we're also joined by Lynn Davenport. Lynn Davenport is a former IT recruiter for Arthur Andersen, who quit to stay at home with her 3 kids, and a public school and education researcher, 11 years as a coach for unemployed people. And we're very excited to have her join us in this conversation. And we'll also get to know more about her as she'll share with us. Maybe we'll start there, actually. Yeah, Lynn, since why don't you share with us about your background and who you are?
Okay, sure. Well, my background is similar to Alison's in that I started paying attention to what was happening in the schools with my kids and seeing this stranglehold of the accountability system, which is our standardized testing. And I'm from Texas, and so we've got, the Bushes and No Child Left Behind and all of that mess. Well, it was kind of a delayed effect before it really started impacting the schools. And so I saw from my oldest to my youngest a shift in the way they were teaching. And then that led me down all kinds of rabbit holes, trying to figure out, following the money. That's what Alison and I are both really good at, and figuring out, where is all this coming from? And the teachers, some of it's a slow boil, and the teachers don't like it, but there's that culture of fear, and they can't really speak out, or else they get ostracized, or they lose their voice. And so then when Alison and I connected, we were on a podcast that another education researcher, Alice Linehan, connected us with. And so she had Alison and I both on a podcast, and we were talking about artificial intelligence and gamification of education, and how edtech, education technology, was coming in the schools. And it was some of it is done kind of behind the scenes, not above board, these contracts that come in. And so you just start following, who are the players. And our commissioner of education in Texas was a Dallas ISD school board trustee, and he's brought in social impact bonds to the Texas legislature, and then that's rolled down into some of the school districts. But they don't, and we'll talk more about the social impact bonds here, but they don't always call them social impact bonds. They have these euphemisms or these innovative sounding names, like math innovation zones. Anytime you hear the word zone, that it's something predatory and sinister, and basically just drawing a line around you. They're going to just suck off all your whatever, your data, your outcomes, your outputs, whatever.
And
so that's pretty much it.
Well, like when I started this, the extent to which Texas and Dallas and then Austin are like tech centers, right? I mean, when I sort of stumbled in, you sort of think of Silicon Valley, but there's a huge landscape in Texas of the tech.
Well, a lot of those backers are their oil money backing these ed tech companies. And so I started seeing this recurring theme. And so now that we know that data is the new oil, it makes sense, because it's really all about the human capital, the natural resources either drying up or maybe not as lucrative as our bodies are going to be. And people look at you like you have two heads if you talk about the internet of bodies, but it's a thing. It's real.
I remember
you heard it here first, you know. I mean,
like Reasoning Mind. That was those early things. Do you remember Reasoning Mind? Like way back when we had that interview. Maybe you can say something about Reasoning Mind, because I think.
No, I went to the legislature and I was talking about Reasoning Mind because they have this genie is what they call it, and this was backed by Moscow and Texas Oil. And so, you know, they always have this story, you know, they get the violin out and it's like, oh, the sob story about these refugees coming from Russia, and they had $50 in their pocket, but they really wanted their kid to know the kind of math that they learned in Russia. And so they just started this software program, which is all BS, because they're petroleum engineers who came to the States. Okay, maybe they struggled a bit, but there were professionals there. They were not refugees. And so I went to the legislature. I mean, when I look back, I was quite naive, but I remember one of these legislators, he was like, so is your issue with Russia? And this was all before the whole Trump Russia stuff. And I was like, well, I mean, yeah, a little bit. Moscow oil is impacting our kids' education here. Yeah, what's wrong with that? It's like I had a tinfoil hat. And then all of a sudden, you know, Russia becomes this huge issue in America. Okay, well, maybe there was a concern. Maybe we should be concerned there. But he was kind of mocking me a bit. But then I was able to produce that. It had this Reasoning Mind software, this math software that was brought in. So basically, investors provide the seed money, the upfront, and they partner with the district, and they measure the results of these kids and their test scores. So if the kids' math scores improve, then the investors get a return. And so we're in the middle of this, and some of the districts is not completed. The payout hasn't happened yet, but Reasoning Mind was one of those contracts that they were part of that math innovation zone, as they call it.
And it was like a chat bot, right? Essentially. And the kids are getting attached to it.
Yes. And so actually it was a Gates Foundation study on this, but they found that the kids were attached to this genie, and they would send her private these messages and saying, you know, I'm going to miss you, Jeannie. I'm moving to, you know, some other state. And I mean, yeah, like they would get attached to a teacher. And so that was my testimony before the legislature. I was like, okay, we need to maybe investigate this and really do a deep dive and figure out, is this really good for kids? And of course, you know, it puts teachers, eventually it works them out of a job. So those who support this stuff, it's like, come on, let's think about this. You become a facilitator initially, and then eventually they'll cram 60 kids in a classroom, or they'll be at home on some device with this genie. So, we know where this is headed.
Yep. Well, thanks for being here.
Yeah.
I think we could just have an episode where you two talk the whole time back and forth. Actually, I honestly feel like it would work.
Well, Lynn's one of the few people who follow, like we had this small core group of most of the people in education. Like, I mean, you know how it's gone. Like the people you thought would be all with you weren't, right? And so we have this sort of core group of people who've been able to actually look at this. And I will say last January, before all of this happened, I actually went down to Dallas and Tulsa, you know, not knowing, like we had a sense stuff was up, but we did not know how quickly it was going to hit, you know, and Lynn and I did some interesting ed tech field visits in Dallas. And the other piece about Dallas that connects to Philly is we know that the human capital bond markets are running through the Federal Reserves. Okay, so both Philadelphia and Dallas have Federal Reserve divisions, which are very significant in the human capital bond project. So,
Right.
Do you want me to sort of set up this episode now, Eduardo? Or
well, I was just why don't we? I don't have to necessarily. I don't have to be the MC. It's just I get sucked into what we're discussing. Why don't we discuss what we're going to be discussing for our audience? I think it's fascinating what you had suggested and proposed that we discuss on this episode. yeah, why don't you, Alison? This is great that you just started it off anyhow. Yeah.
Well, so essentially, I can't remember who shared it with me a couple weeks ago, a clip of a news broadcast out of Dallas. So this is, so Lynn, you're in Richardson, but next, adjacent to the Dallas School District. It was a new hybrid learning school, and they were taking enrollments, and it was a news clip about how wonderful this new hybrid learning school was going to be, and how they were framing it as parent and student choice, which we know, historically the choice movement has been used to sort of fragment the education space, right? Like there's the neighborhood school people versus the charter school people versus homeschool. So it's framed as an alternate option, especially under the latest health protocols, like, oh, well, maybe you would like this new hybrid option, which we've known is coming. So this was a feature, a key part of this hybrid learning school is something called STEMuli. So STEM, which is the science, technology, engineering, math push that we've seen, at least going back to Obama, if not before. And when I watched this, this STEMuli interface was both a software that connected to remaking children as avatars and earning these badges, and then feeding into a workforce aligned education model, which is something that goes back through Mark Tucker and the NCEE, the National Council on Education and the Economy, which is Carnegie Corporation funded, to the late 80s. And a lot of folks, and the conservatives were actually right on this piece, raising concerns around this Dear Hillary letter about Mark Tucker writing a letter to the Clintons when the Clintons came into office that we were going to have workforce aligned education. And this is, many people frame this as socialism, right? But really this is a workforce aligned. It is not governments running the corporations. It is the corporations running the government. It's really, in my opinion, more of a fascist totalitarian structure.
So a planned economy? Is that how it was framed, as a planned economy?
Planned economies, really. These regional planned economies would not go over well. So that they were going to gradually engineer it into this new version. And so what we've come up with now, as we have digital identity and online education and badges, is that there's this shift where it's crazy, because on the one hand, they're talking about regional aligned workforce economies, but then they're also talking about globalization and competing globally. So I'm not sure which it's ultimately going to be, but the STEMuli seems to be at the center of it. So when I saw this and I knew it was connected to the greater Dallas area, I said, I would love to deconstruct this with you all. I pulled together, I added into the news clip sections from, and my editing skills are not great, from a number of other videos from their channel. So STEMuli has a YouTube channel, actually is very undersubscribed. I think most of their videos have like 40 views or something. It's quite
not
unusual.
like you, Alison.
Well, no, I'm not saying that, but I'm like, if you are essentially pitching,
no, I know. I mean, it's,
these big things saying the biggest school districts in our country are signed on to the STEMuli program, you would figure they would get like more than a couple dozen views. So it's unclear exactly to what extent STEMuli is real, like fully real, or what's actually behind it. Is there a bigger structure behind it? But I think it's indicative of a lot of where things are headed. And I wanted to talk about it with you guys, because based on real education, science education, based in relationship versus this gamified version. And then I wanted to, after we have a discussion of it, talk a little bit more with Lynn about the educational landscape in Dallas and what and Texas generally, and what that signifies for this larger movement. I don't know. Does that sound okay? It's about a 5-minute video, I think.
Yeah, I think it would be very enlightening for our folks here at What's Left, for sure.
Yeah, so Texas meets the Bay Area. Like, it's a nice, like, bringing together of cultures.
We have a lot of silicon in Texas, but it hasn't been this kind of silicon.
Yeah. Well, I was telling Lynn that my brother and sister-in-law tried to escape California education system by moving to Dallas. So this is not the episode that they want to watch.
No.
So we'll start with watching the video, and then we'll discuss from there.
Yeah.
Behind me is the Dallas ISD campus that'll hold the very first of its kind hybrid school, mixing online with in-person learning, reimagining what the traditional school day looks like.
Technology is changing the way we work, the way we play, and even the way we midnight snack. But what about education?
So our platform connects students to their future through providing them with virtual mentorship, digital resumes and portfolios, and a video library of over thousands of videos where industry partner employees are talking about the important skills for them to be successful in their career. So students can upload their resumes, their portfolios, and the mentors can provide feedback on that.
4th, 5th, and 6th grade.
Taylor Sheed is the founder of STEMuli, the creators behind this new virtual world students will be attending school in.
It's a video game. It's a school and a video game.
One login, a simple dashboard.
On Google Chrome, type in STEMuli.net. Once you've arrived to our home page, go to Student Sign In. At the bottom, select Dallas Independent School District. Now, go ahead and log in with Clever, and then select Login with Google, and here enter your student email address.
When your child first logs in, they will select a custom avatar. Over time, they will learn and collaborate in an open sandbox world with their friends.
STEMuli is a connected schoolhouse for a connected world and easy access to your teacher.
Right here in Dallas ISD.
Is that lessons are on the right and a brief description of the project is found on the left. From your lessons on the right, there is also a quiz and a badge that you earn for completing successfully the project. First time, you may notice also a Connect to Badger icon. Feel free to go ahead and connect your STEMuli account to Badger, click Start Lesson, and this takes you directly to your first video that you can interact with.
And participate in skill building activities to prepare them for the future of work, where students use their digital resumes and portfolio to apply to jobs all around the world.
Work experience when you're ready.
Whether somebody wants to play by themselves or whether they want to play in groups.
Actually being able to move around in the screen, it just seems a little more interesting.
And while this is only for 4th through 6th graders right now, Dr. Romero hopes it'll eventually be offered to any grade level so every student can take advantage of this innovative learning.
STEMuli and the Dallas Education Foundation came together to design the learning experience of the 22nd century. We have built a technology that is in some of the largest school districts in America, and we're working with some of the largest companies like IBM and Microsoft. Kids can invent their own world. This is one of the most exciting components of our platform, where students actually get to engage in mentorship and other activities with industry partner employees that we call influencers.
So as you can see here, I'm currently logged in as an industry partner, and I'm going to come over here to the left side until we get to this expanded menu, and then we're going to click virtual class. So as you can see here, you will have your one classroom that you'll be able to see and access. So you'll want to click into there, and then this will be everything that you've put into the lesson.
We want to give them the ability to reach more of your students. One of the biggest things that we encountered in Dallas is that it is very hard to get an industry partner to leave their desk in order to engage with students. With a commitment of 1 minute a day where they post videos, pictures, and text to motivate students or just to show them what a day in their career is like. And basically the mentor gets a task and uploads a video, and she can correspond directly with those students. We want to use a lot of the skill sets that we're teaching students here in America to acclimate to corporate culture, to be our employability piece, which is how students can apply for internships. You will see their digital resume and portfolio within that feature. So we want to use our mobile app technology, and we want to develop new AI into that technology in order to really connect these students to their future in a global society. Dallas ISD Hybrid Prep is the first school of its kind in Texas. To enroll your 4th through 6th grade student, go to dallasisd.org/hybrid school.
Romero believes this will eventually become the model for schooling across the nation,
Equipping teachers with the tools they need and all the real-time data districts like to see. The virtual classroom of tomorrow, serving the students of today. We're building a safer and better way to learn.
Well, that was awesome.
It's dark, isn't it? I mean, it's
It is.
pretty-
Yeah, I sent that around to people. I posted that on a Facebook page, and it was like, at one level, there was a bunch of people who were like, it was really chilling. I did send it to some teachers who were like, some of them actually said there might be something good about that. And then others were also saying, look, that's never going to fully happen, and it's something to see the whole thing laid out like that.
Well, and there are a lot of parents who eat that up thinking that it's innovative. It's going to give my kid a cutting edge, give them an advantage. And a lot of men buy into this stuff too. The women are usually more skeptical. Dads are always there showing up to things in the school district when they've got a technology rollout or something new and shiny. The dads are always for it seems like. Not to, divide the sexes there, but it's, when I see it, I think it was Alfie Kohn said digital doggy biscuits, and that's what I think of when you hear about these badges and them, grabbing for this kind of gamified world, creating this digital twin with the avatar. And then talking about connected. Well, it's the opposite. You're actually disconnected. And so it's ironic. And you always hear the word reinventing, reimagining. And what they're reimagining or reinventing is something that it's not better. It's dystopian and sad to me.
Yeah, I agree, Lynn, where you said that parents will eat it up. I think I shared this at a different episode. I was at my nephew's school because I co-parent with my brother, and we were very involved in our family. And at his school, my nephew's school in San Francisco, I was trying to make sure that his education was not being what was already given to him during this time that the schools were not opening. The schools were closed. They were doing virtual learning, and he was in a learning pod, so he didn't have to be in it much. But once he went back, I heard teachers talk about going back on in the classroom, but on a screen, and that they were going to have a big screen for the other students who are being home to log in and to be at the same time. I think this is where I get confused: synchronous and asynchronous. I think it's synchronous, which is real time at the same time, right, Alison? So they had this. The school district invested in these big screens for students as young as 5 to be able to log in and be basically on Zoom in their classroom, and some students would be in person. And I just saw it as a transition to what's the future, right? But they don't see it. They're talking about it in the name of equity and more tech and more ebooks and more homework on Seesaw, and this is a program that's being used, and more tech being used. And I said to the teachers, what was the point of reopening schools if we're just going to be doing virtual learning? And so she felt I pressured her, and I was being conflictive, and so they brought it up. And a few of us parents, families, and guardians, we got together and we decided to write a letter, an email, really, and said we want to opt out. Right? We don't want this, and you have to find an alternative. You're just going to have to find an alternative. So it caused some friction at school. But it's like the families I was trying, this is my point, to your point, Lynn, when you talk about parents eating it up, the families in the school that I was trying to talk to, which was difficult because we're all in virtual parent family meetings here. It's not like you can just be in the hallways. Some of them, I was trying to talk to them about making sure that our kids are not sucked into this tech world and data and harvesting their data, but they wouldn't. I don't know. They didn't seem too convinced. They were more interested in. Yeah.
Is that's better? That's what the rich.
Yeah.
They think, okay, this is what the wealthy people have, and so I want that too. And that's where they think it's equity. So it's going to bring those who don't have up. But it's a false sense of it's well, and I always call it fake witty because they use those words for their gain. And so, like, okay, like in my district, in one of our Title I schools, one of the chambers or one of those organizations donated iPads to the kids, and everyone's just like, "Oh, this is so wonderful." And then it's like it's such a great thing. Well, it's not. It makes me sick to see it because they have the kids all holding up their new screens, and we all know that it's the time-tested things that all kids need, those slow and steady, the books, the paper, the pencils, like using their hands, and it's sad to see that buy-in for the technology, that it's going to be this equalizer, and it's not.
I mean, I think part of it too is the surveillance, right? I mean, to me, in the game footage of the video game, it was so obvious that there was this floating robot eyeball following the children around, staring at them. I mean, and Eduardo, I think your comment about like, there's no hall to pull someone aside in, right? You can't quietly have a sidebar conversation with someone, right? Like you can't sort of eye people's body language up that easily and like have like engineer a sidebar conversation about things. When you're in Zoom, everybody's stuck in a box. You can't there's no privacy for any of these social relations. Not that you're trying to keep something secret, but you just might want to share something with a particular group of people or one person that you feel like might resonate with you. And that is shut out when you've got the robot eyeball staring at everybody. And it's just, to me, it was shocking how clear they made that in the game. It was just like, it was a key feature.
Yeah, it brings me back to what Alison was talking about, one of our previous episodes, in regards to resumes and portfolios and how, this history, especially of young kids, is going to follow them through all their life. And, how people don't see that as, again, tracking something scary, something that that is run through an algorithm. And I think, Alison, you were the one who mentioned this phrase of algorithms being coded opinions, right? And so we have this sense of science being completely objective and unbiased, and that's how it's sold, right? Like at the end of the video, they talked about like a safer world, and and that to me is scary, right? Like you were talking about families and how in the time of COVID, this seems safer. And just a year and a half ago, we knew screens were really bad for kids. And here we are talking about putting every kid in a screen for a safer world, a safer future. So yeah, those are kind of the first things. Maybe we'll talk about like the labor force, because that's something else. How they frame it as being able to apply to a job anywhere in the world, and the implications that has in tracking and borders and all these things just completely changing. With all this surveillance tech. So there's a lot, like you said at the beginning, a lot to unpack, but right now I'm focusing on the resumes and the portfolios.
For 4th through 6th grade, guys. This school is 4th through 6th grade.
I didn't know what I never thought about my resume, and they're pushing this stuff younger and younger because let's be honest, workforce is not the same as education, and they don't have to be mutually exclusive, but I think they're putting the cart before the horse because they're not getting that foundational knowledge, the stuff that we got, the things that all these people take for granted. And that Taylor Shedd, I found out she's from Plano, which is a suburb north of Dallas, and she went to private school. And here she's pushing this stuff on these public school kids, and it's hard to watch.
It's blatant. I think she said something about corporate ties. We're preparing them for the corporate future, right?
Yeah. And I mean, look, it's my job before all this happened was to prepare future workers for future exploitation. That was my job a year ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, because that is what education is about. Education really is about a process of reproducing future labor. So for whatever the needs of capital are at that time. But I do think that this makes sense to me that it's 4th and 6th grade as it relates to the global, because when they say we want students to have access to the global workforce, that means capitalists are using a global workforce to pick the best that they can, the cheapest that they can. That's the world, and that's the global gig economy that is being constructed. That I think they would be right to start with 4th and 6th, because by around that time, I do think that's when, in about 10 years, this is where it's going to be, I feel like, much more up and running, and we're just at the beginning of that process of the transformation of work, so that work will look like these Zoom boxes, and so that education needs to look like these Zoom boxes. It was very interesting to me that they say things like easy access to a teacher, which that's the opposite of what this would be. But look how much emphasis they put on access to corporate mentees and instructors. And they talked about, well, business people aren't going to leave their desk. So they talked about these things like a Slack job, like a task. Like we got to give them something off the Slack menu so that there's a kid we can dump towards them so they can do something. And I did start to think about this is how people who were trying to game the system of a human impact investment can win. Like get in touch with your student so you can produce a better outcome. I mean, it starts to make sense how they're giving access of these students, not just the data, but their interactions. We're losing it with the teacher, but we're going to move it much more towards the corporate world and those folks up there. So it really does look like the humans that they will be in contact with are increasingly going to be people who are connected to the world of profits and investment and whatever it is that's up there. And the only other thing that really stuck out to me was the notion of words like you can interact with a video. When did we start thinking that you interacted with a television? Like and this is the backwards world. Like, and in many ways we hear it and we all, oh yeah, interact. But there is a way that language is being inverted, and we're being retrained to think differently about what actually represents connection. Connection is actually something that happens in 3 dimensions and through touch and through your senses. And here, there's virtually no sense that's used except for your eyeballs, and it's all indirect. It's nothing. It's in 2 dimensions. So it's really frightening what's happening there, and it's also chilling to me that it doesn't upset more people. But I do think it really was helpful to see that video because it put a real face behind all the things that we've been talking about in terms of 4th Industrial Revolution, Great Reset, and stuff like that.
Well, I just want to point out too, it might have gone a bit quickly, but one of the sections I put in with intention was the login, because they were logging in both with Clever, which is a platform that creates interoperable data across many different, I don't know if, I know Rocket Ship Academy uses Clever, like some of the different charters, I don't know if they're in use in your schools, but the intention of Clever was to create the interoperable data systems that will be able to track impact and feed to these online learning lockers, really. So even Rocket Ship was using QR codes with kindergartners to log into their edtech programs. And you would use the same QR code on the camera to log into all your different ones. So all the data fed to the same dashboard. So it was both Clever and Google, right? And it's interesting. Someone just shared with me today on Twitter, it was talking about ESG investment holdings, this new stakeholder capitalism, and that one of the main stocks being held in ESG portfolios, the environmental social governance, was Alphabet, which I can't even imagine how Google Alphabet could be considered any of those things. But if you understand that like this login was both Clever and your Google login, because Google has, in the manifest destiny of school district data harvest, taken over the email accounts and the Google Drives of so many school districts, those 2 logins to me felt very significant, both from a surveillance standpoint and the human capital investing standpoint. I mean, and the other piece I will say is the mentor part. So, I had spoken about this back in 2017, the shift that I had seen towards mentors. And it was on the one hand about workforce alignment, but deprofessionalizing teaching, right? That having a work-based project, whether it's with a video or a corporate actor throwing up a 1-minute TikTok thing, is the same as actually someone who is trained in knowing how to work with children and youth in a developmentally appropriate way. It's almost like I can't even imagine what the university graduate schools of education would be teaching these days if they're going along with this. It's pretty shocking.
Well, I definitely want to go back on the surveillance thing. The thing that actually has to be understood is literally if the students are experiencing the game through essentially a World of Warcraft kind of situation, that that's what that game reminded me of. It looked like one of those games called MOAB. Kenny, what do you know? Do you know what those games are called? They're basically where you get an avatar and you walk around a world and it's kind of created for you.
Like Minecraft?
Yeah, yeah, it's sort of like Minecraft. But, I mean, they have like superhero games that are like this, and
yeah, you're just going through and you're jumping over, and
and you meet other people. What they have their
oh yeah, and you're talking to people as you're going through. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so first off, every single thing you do is recorded. Like every single thing you do, everything you say. There's no side comments there, and you can talk here, but then that's all collected as well. So it's
Fortnite,
gathered.
That's what I'm thinking. Fortnite.
Yeah, and it's gathered in relationship to a world created by some humans. Like this is a human created world. This is not the real world. This is a simulated world, and so the fact that they get to create somebody else creates a simulated world. Generally, the same people who are actually going to be collecting that data. It's like they're literally able to run any experiment by changing that world to see how you would respond, because you're not. And this is where it gets to education or even science. You can't even do a science experiment in that world because it's a human world. It's not actually the physical world of the surprises and observations. There are more surprises in a student having scissors, paper, and a lighter and a Bunsen burner in a lab than 1,000 years of sitting inside of a simulated thing. There's no surprises there because that world is constructed already for them. There's nothing they can find that's new because it's already been entirely constructed. So that's one of the things. It's a kind of educational prison, and you collect the data of everything a person does for whatever reasons you would have to do it. Right? You could say it's good. But there's literally no surprises, and everything is collected, even if it wasn't seen as something where we're collecting it to control you. That is a completely controlled world by whoever designed the program, and it's incredibly dangerous to think of that anything in there as freeing or as actually discovery, because there's nothing been discovered. It was already created by somebody else. Discovery is a very different process, and maybe that's something we can talk about in terms of what a real science experience would look like, and really what a real educational experience would look like. Because not only can you not discover anything new in the world, you won't discover anything about the humans that you see in there. As you noticed, when they all got up from the desk, they all got up as one. They have a limited set of dances you can do because you have to choose the dance you do, when you meet. But there's nothing unique about you that you can really show. And that's what happens in a classroom. There's all sorts of problems with public education. But the idea that students actually get to see each other and interact with each other and be defiant together, that is so important to the possibility of their humanity. And that possibility is literally eliminated in this place. It's literally the Matrix. I mean,
yes.
That's what that is. Except they're not batteries at the end. It's data being collected. So it's kind of crazy for me. As I talk more about it, I scare myself more.
Can I chime in just on beyond the gaming, also the mentorship stuff? Because you noticed, now they're going to frame this, if you kind of read between the lines, as project-based learning. Like, I don't know if that came across clearly, but, you know, we've been conditioned to think project-based learning is good, right? Like, because we imagine a project the way we would do a project, right? Not that the project is now interacting with a video or interacting with an online mentor, right, in a chat box. So, but they're very calculating in the terms that they use. And I will say, one of the things when I just happened to be in Dallas when I encountered this, but a lot of my work is following LinkedIn profiles. And I remember going through Little Sis, and I was sitting on your sofa, Lynn, like in Dallas, and reading the woman who was the head of, she had been the head of Crisis Text Line, right? So this is the text line for people who, you know, are thinking about self-harm, right? Who are in very difficult circumstances. And that this woman then went on to a job where they used machine learning, sentiment analysis on all of the texts in the crisis text line to create call center training software.
Wow.
Now, I would say most people, if you saw that video of like the mentor throwing up a video and having these nice conversations with students in a box or whatever we do online when we're doing chatting, that it would be mined for training, not like to create value, right, for a private corporation. And in this case, the company was actually called Loris AI, LORIS.ai. And on their website, they gleefully stated that the loris was a poisonous lemur. So there was some sort of like dark stuff going on with this corporate, beyond that it was simply using people's most vulnerable thoughts to create value for a company, that it was this particular company. And so I would think many of the families who might jump at the fact of this giving their child an edge do not realize the extent to which these devices are actually sucking data out and like limiting their children's choices. In that, and that short clip that I had with Hoskinson from Cardano about Ethiopia, it was a 2-minute clip, but he pretty much said, your metadata will follow you from your earliest childhood, and its alignment with the government's interest, and it will decide who's a good actor, who's worthy of dealing with, and who has the right to have a job. So if you put that 2-minute clip of Cardano's plans for the children of Ethiopia up against STEMuli, and you say, like, and it might not even be your personal interactions, it may simply be your cartoon avatar. And goodness helps you if your younger sibling gets into your avatar and starts doing crazy, crazy stuff with your avatar, and it's all tracked as if it were you, right?
Your social credits were way down. Well, did you catch the IBM? Did it say something about?
And Microsoft.
And IBM, so that whole P-Tech pathway that they have, it was based off of, IBM was the model. And I don't know how much you know about IBM and Hollerith, and that IBM did the punch cards that they used during the Holocaust, and that was the tracking.
And apartheid.
I mean, what?
And apartheid.
And apartheid.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Both.
So when you look at the history there, and you think about the capability, I mean, what they could do with all of this, it is frightening. That Hollerith, it has a big eye shining. I don't know if you've seen the posters from back then, but it's freaky. There's that eye again.
And it's the punch cards. It's all the data, right? So imagine the data they had at that time, the census data and the demographic data with the metadata, you know, the granularity.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the founder, or supposed founder, because you had mentioned, Allison, that you suspected that there was a bigger organization, something bigger behind STEMuli, and I believe there is too. And if you look at this, the head, the Taylor Shedd, and look at her background, I've taken note of her because she was put on, they have these stacked testimonies that they bring to the legislature, or they bring to these committees that are set up by the legislature. And so she was brought, you know, the people like me, I wait 7-8 hours. At the end of the day, I get my 2 minutes, but these stacked invited guests she was one of them, and she gives this whole story about her childhood or her mother, and it's a rough childhood, but I didn't see any point to why she was there because of that. And so they always pick someone who has some sort of, I mean, we all have struggles in our background, everybody's got a story, but it does seem to me that they put, for the face of these organizations or these entities, they will pick people that draw upon that, and that's how they pitch. And even political candidates do it all the time. We couldn't pay our electric bill, and that is somehow supposed to get buy-in for this program, and it really doesn't connect at all. And that, I don't mean to sound like I'm not empathetic or I don't care about the struggle. I mean, I wouldn't do what I do I work with unemployed people, and some are so close to homelessness, and these are dire situations.
But
they always pick what?
They're strategic in how they frame the narrative, right?
Yes.
The equity narrative.
And they always use people of color to put them as the face of these things, but behind the scenes, it's a former Goldman guy behind it. And so when you were saying that you thought maybe there's something bigger behind it. So Taylor Shedd serves on the Dallas Education Foundation, and so does the guy who's the blockchain, the Dallas, it's called Greenlight Credentials. He's also serving on the Dallas Education Foundation. There's something going on with the nonprofit, this whole nonprofit industrial complex that's in Dallas is always connected to the education stuff. And Allison and I have been really digging into this Dallas County Promise, the free college for all, where parents have to forego their VURBL rights in order to give them access to the students. Some of the parents are also going through this Dallas County Promise where they get free college, and they also forego their right to privacy. And so it's a way for them to track these students, and if they can, they want pre-K through the workforce or womb to tomb access to track it's longitudinal data is what they really want. But the same people.
Just to be clear, like the blockchain education model is something that both Dallas and Tulsa are on the leading edge of. Tulsa has the MIT Learning Machine, and then in Dallas, it's Greenlight Credential is the blockchain, which is at this point is the high school kids, but could easily morph into this hybrid blended model. With, I will just point out the Badger. It was a brief section of that video, but it says, if you'd like to go ahead and hook up your Badger account to your STEMuli account, go ahead and do that now. And the Badger will be these badging systems that will likely be on blockchain. So I guess the question is, at what point does the hybrid school blend into the blockchain, the Greenlight Credential program?
All the signs point to that being the end game here. And that's really what all of this, I didn't understand it when I would see this. So basically a former Goldman Sachs executive started this nonprofit. It's called Commit, the Commit Partnership. It's tied with the Strive Together network, which Allison has talked about in Cincinnati. But it didn't make sense. Now Allison has helped me put the pieces together. I do believe that blockchain is where they're headed with this and getting the credentials, and it's pitched as being this, this you own your own data, you are in charge of your destiny, and no longer do you have to wait for these institutions to give you your transcript. Now you hold the keys to your own data, and it sounds great. And then it's unhackable, immutable ledger. They talk about the ledger, and after we collaborate and we share information and figuring out. Allison is the one that really put it all together, understanding these really complex finance structures. And how
games, right? A lot of it is game theory. And that's what's so interesting about the gaming scenario is that these hedge funds, when we went back to the GameStop, episode, and we were talking about the the app and the short sales, like the hedge funds trade on this game theory too. And so it's the simulated models, right? And if you push the world into a simulation that's under man-made control, it's not simply surveillance or limiting people's options, which is actually quite a beautiful sentiment, Andy, about the, foreclosing discovery, foreclosing surprises, all of that. But it's actually channeling for these bets that are going to be made. And JP Morgan Chase is the major funder of the Dallas County Promise, right?
Correct.
And I was just up in New York this Saturday, and we were doing revocations on Wall Street of these different things. And I went to the House of Morgan, right? The House of JP Morgan. And I was telling, we had about 20 people it was sort of a teach-in on the steps. And, and I told them about Dallas County Promise. And, most people understand that access to higher education financially is really tenuous, right? So they bring people in with this option, not only a free associates, but even early college, right? So you're pushing 16-year-olds, in my mind, like, do we really think most 16-year-olds are doing college level work? Like, why are we rushing kids? Why do we not make college affordable and give them work-based learning in the summer, then pay them for it, right? And then let them, be in their 20s, early 20s when they get into work. Why are we sending 17-year-olds into a workforce that we know is going to abuse them, right? And, JP Morgan, they were railroads and they were steel. And then the steel was done with coal, and that was mining. And then they ran these mines in northern Alabama, the Pratt mines, and they scooped up Black people for vagrancy, and they ran them through trials and then threw them in the mines and worked them to death. And that thing, if we understand this promise, what is the promise of empire? The promise of empire is we're going to mine the crap out of you. And like now these kids are that. And,
well, it's exclusive access. And so it's these deals are done behind the scenes, and it's that green light credentials. That's a for-profit entity. It was an insider deal done. So they partner with the Dallas Community College District and the schools. When they talked about the FERPA waiver from the parents, that's when I realized, okay, I see what they're doing here. So it's just the early bird gets the worm. And so early access to this very lucrative data, there will be a payout down the road. What's difficult is that there's no smoking gun. So the payout hasn't happened yet. So it's very difficult to tell people this is coming, it's going to happen, but you can't really prove it until the payout comes.
I was interested in what is Lynn's perspective from at Dallas with teachers and families around this, because I'm sure you've spoken with them, and what is it like sharing this? Because if what you're sharing, obviously here it makes sense, but how is it received in your district, or at least to the people you talk to?
Well, I think most people buy into the idea that free college, who doesn't want free college? And so it's not really free college. It's basically just setting them up for access to different options of funding. So it may be a combination of funds that they would be granted access to. So I would say most people, if they're doing the Dallas County Promise, they think, I don't care if they have my data. I don't have anything to hide. I don't think that I try and say it in the most concise, bite-sized, easy to digest way, and the eyes glaze over. So,
the other thing too is that they're going after the parents.
Yes, and so I said that before, where they get.
So like all of these impact deals where they can do it to double dip, they call it like the 2-generation program, right? They get the kids and the parents. So if you have a high school child and then you have a parent who hasn't finished a degree or started, they've actually set their sights on doubling that market. So they're actually creating opportunities for, while the child gets in the program, if you have a parent who would be eligible for the program too. They go through the program together.
Well, and Alison, you presented a solution. And I think that's what it's difficult to present the problem with the model and then also catch their attention to say, okay, here's a solution. And people are often looking at the problem and not really coming up with real solutions. It's whoever gets there first with their, it's, these broken and on purpose systems, then they come in to clean it up with their idea of what should happen.
So let me just so there's this program or commit, and there's something about commit that is related to getting students on a blockchain. Is that correct?
As far as we know, yes, but it's like I said, there's no smoking gun, and so it's all conjecture at this point. But all roads lead, all signs point to commit, because the same people who I call it like this. It's this education ecosystem. It's a patronage network. It is tied to Teach for America, and you all know, I'm sure, you get 5 weeks of training, and then you get promised, you teach for 2 years because you have to. And then you get out of the classroom as soon as possible so you can go, boost your political career, get on boards and commissions and political favors. And so there's a big Teach for America component to, they're all kind of tied together. But then you got the Goldman Sachs guy, and there's charter schools that are tied to this, a lot of education technology. So they're all scratching each other's backs and creating these fake nonprofits.
And I'm trying to understand what this blockchain thing is, what it really means. Because currently, if I'm a student and I'm thinking about, okay, I'm in high school, I'm going to college, I have my transcript, I have my file that has some information in it about me based on, how I behaved and what people said about me. I have a set of recommendations that I've accumulated. I have my SAT, my ACT scores. Now, that is generally and a resume of some sort. And maybe I've written a letter, I've written an essay or a few essays about myself. And that is generally what I marshal together to move forward to the next step.
Yeah, your online resume, your online portfolio.
Is blockchain a sort of a digital version of that, but with much more detail? Is that what blockchain is replacing, is essentially that thing? Or is it doing even more than that?
Well, so they're always sneaky about how they do this. Like, as Lynn pointed out, if you can frame something as the affluent districts have it, right? The children of the elite have it. And so then everybody else wants it, right? And so you'll set up a case study. And so back when I was starting to look into this early on, and we were focused on competency-based education and the proficiency mastery model, this was maybe 5 years ago, there was something called the Mastery Transcript Consortium, okay? And they were like, and it was all like elite boarding schools, right? And these elite boarding schools were going to do mastery transcripts now, and they would have wedge pie charts where they would have things like leadership, and they would be managing not just your grades but your characteristics, and it had all these color codings, and it looked very fancy because you're like, oh, look how deeply rich this profile is that has all of this information about this child in it that's so meaningful, right? And so they want you to want to have this thing, right? But ultimately, this mastery transcript will be your online learning locker. Like, and I think for a while, even like Harvard and some of the elite schools were talking about making a switch to different application processes. And I think that's part of also the dropping of the standardized test scores. Because if they accomplish what they want, there will be no four-year college, no associate's degree, no graduate programs for all but the most elite universities. And then everyone else will simply be cobbling together micro-credentials for the next gig. Like, when you're talking about what will the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders do, the future that is being built out for them right now is that you will never get a degree or finish a degree. You will merely be a constellation of data points of things that fit you into the global gig economy or not. And that will include your emotional and your behavioral data, right? And so they have to kind of frame the narrative. And so it's still being framed as though you have access to college. And for, the next several cohorts of people, it might actually still kind of look like college. But for the young kids coming up, there will be no college, because the control mechanism is the education management system, which is the carrot, always like the next thing you must have, and the next level of debt you have to go into self-finance that microcredit. And so that is this is all the stuff that's going into the XAPI and into your learning locker. And that learning locker will ultimately be blockchain. Is it blockchain today? It may not be blockchain today. Is it a blockchain in 10 years? Yes, it's definitely a blockchain in the spatial web in 10 years. So, but people don't know what the 10-year game is unless you're running the game. And the people running the game are not letting anybody else know what the game is.
Right.
So
Alison and I just stumbled upon it along the way.
Yeah.
But only those who really are pushing this know what this is. And all of us are just kind of, we're just going along. So we don't know.
Yeah.
Kenny?
I have a question. Have you along the way stumbled upon any signals that show this marriage of biotech and, online? How do you see that happening in education? And I don't know if we have enough time for that, but
yeah, I know. Ooh, biotech. Yeah. Well, Lynn,
do we ever? Yeah. In fact, I'm glad you said that, because that's an important piece of this. And so that commit partnership that it was founded by the Goldman Sachs guy, former Goldman Sachs guy, they're moving into this 23-acre biotech hub, which is a building where this dystopian film called Logan's Run was filmed in 1976. And I was telling my mom about it, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I was supposed to be an extra in that movie, but then they wanted me to not. They wanted her naked under her costume, so she was like, no thanks." And so she didn't do it. And so if you go and watch this film, everybody dies at 30. They've got this thing that they're born in their hand. But I digress. So this 23-acre biotech hub is going to house 5 social impact organizations. Draper, Kaplan, Richards, which is a foundation that's moving there. The president of our Federal Reserve in Dallas is the Kaplan of Draper, Kaplan, Richards. Interesting. He's also a former Goldman Sachs guy. And there you got a charter school, Uplift Charters are in there, and then UT Southwestern. And so this is supposed to be, we're not really known for our biotech prowess in Dallas. So it'll be interesting to see, but that nexus of all of those entities and how it ties in with education. And because the Commit Partnership is so focused on pre-K and access to pre-K babies and getting as many kids in pre-K as possible, I think it'll be, I think it's something that we need to watch. And if it is tied with the blockchain, I suspect that green light will be affiliated with it in some way.
Well, and then I would say, in the education space, that's the challenge of the community school model, right? Now, on the one hand, they're trying to get rid of bricks and mortar schools in favor of drop-in centers. Yeah. But the school as drop-in center, since they essentially Obama gutted FERPA, it means that if you start to have health and therapeutic services in something that is identified as an education setting, the data is much less protected. But my sense is that ultimately the blockchain identity system will include your health records, right? Because there's been a huge push around pushing medical services into school settings, right? And
they're not giving vaccines right now in the schools. We see that,
right?
It makes me cringe.
Right. And so there's issues of consent for minors and having medical procedures, whatever they are, without parent consent or involvement, what the level of the records are. And then the other piece of this is also food access, because increasingly I think we're morphing through the synthetic biology into where GMO foods are being placed in position of actually changing your health status, like beyond just a normal nutritional status. But in other ways, we're talking about, vaccines and foods, but other talking about like epigenetics and, engineered food based on your DNA. So you can sort of see how that might overlap with the school lunch program, right? With these incentives, because now many schools, again, have been pushed to have like everyone in the school has full access to the thing, which again, I am in no way saying I want children hungry. Absolutely not. But a lot of the food that's pushed into the school is pretty much crap food. I mean, I'm in Philly. We don't have kitchens in most of our schools. Our schools were built largely. There's some modern ones, but when kids walked home to go to school, to lunch, they would walk home for lunch and they would come back. So in those schools, the food was just microwavable junk in a plastic bag, pretty much, and it wasn't the fault of the people managing the food systems, but that's just logistically how it was. And a lot of there's like commodity crap stuff that's coming into the after school programs that's not really healthy. And so if you can imagine the food access with the telehealth, teletherapy access and all going on blockchain, because they've already shifted towards the food payments, often with biometrics or unique identifiers with your school ID, that all starts to come into the technocratic system. And Lynn, Mike Morath, who is a key player in the Dallas education space, his career before that was with something called Minute Menu, which was food for children and I think like the elderly, like in senior care homes. It was like managed food programs. I don't know, Lynn, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, just that he's been propped up as the Texas Education Agency Commissioner. So he's the commissioner of, I think it's the 5th largest school district in the nation. We educate 1/10 of America's children in Texas. If you think about how big Texas is a target, because they can take Texas, we're good to go. So it's always been kind of a hotbed of these bad reforms. But the Minute Menu thing, I always found that interesting, because he keeps saying that he sold his company and he made money, and it's not about money. Now he wants to go in and help kids, and he was a big brother's little sister, big brother's big, whatever it's called, and he was a big brother, and that inspired him to get involved in education because he saw what was happening with his little brother. And there's always a story there, and they create these people through the media, and then that becomes the truth, and then it's perpetuated in every article since then. This is what people read. And Todd Williams, the founder of Commit, he's listed on Morath's application to be the education commissioner. So if you see this in this lineage, what's interesting about the seat that he had on the Dallas ISD school board, why is this important for the nation, is because Sandy Kress was also in that seat. And Sandy Kress was picked, he's a lawyer, was picked by George Bush to help push and write. He was an architect of No Child Left Behind. That Dallas ISD particular seat, that District 2 seat, is very important in the education, that reform movement that influences all of America. Yeah. Oh, and I'll say one more thing about Sandy Kress. He went to work for Pearson after he pimped No Child Left Behind. Then he goes to work for Pearson as a lobbyist for a testing giant and makes millions. But yes, Tom Luce. So he's part of this thing called Texas 2036 with Margaret Spellings, and Margaret Spellings was a former education secretary under George Bush. And Tom Luce has been, he's been engaged in education for decades. I don't know which piece you wanted me to tell about him, just overall.
I think that there was a gathering at one of the churches or whatever when he was essentially talking about the corporate America wanting the children. Like they were talking about, it's interesting when you talked about, Arnold is Enron, right? No, but it was Milken. Yeah. Milken is KinderCare. But some of these they're working on the pre-K space, right? Because the social impact bonds are in, home visits, pre-K up to 3rd grade test scores. A lot of these corporations actually want corporate childcare so that they can groom up their human capital under the overall, like this purview. And that's what Lou said. He's like, I can envision a day
Yes.
campus.
Exxon.
And the children never leave our campus. Like they were in pre-K on our campus. We have schools that are corporate schools on our campus. We raise them all the way up to be essentially, representatives of what we imagine the human capital is that we need.
That's right. It was an article in the Houston Chronicle about Tom Luce, and he was talking about the corporate structure. The way it looks in the future is that you drop off your kid in the child care there, and they're in some sort of school in the workplace.
But and I mean, the other thing, Kenny, is beyond the biology is I think the behavioral training, because the impact markets are often about measurable behavior change. And so if you can imagine, like in this video game world, even maybe 4 or 5 years ago, when I was first grappling with this idea of artificial intelligence designed education and thinking, there's no way to actually, as much as you talk about accountability, if every child is getting a custom curriculum according to whose standards, right? Like, oh, we've already predicted you onto this pathway that is into like a racialized caste system, right? Like, because we know the future of work is something that is very limited and who's going to get jobs and who isn't. And whatever pathway you're on, you have self-reinforcement feedback loops. You put someone in one of these games, not only do you have no accountability, but you can essentially create the mindset that you want for an individual based on, all of whatever data points they come into the pre-K program with, right? And then you decide what their behavior should be, and then you make that behavior that or not, and you measure it, and then you make these impact bets. And so that's what I think is so twisted. If parents had any understanding of this, right? I mean, if you had any understanding that people were, this was not about opening opportunity, but really foreclosing it. And in foreclosing it, actually making money off of hurting your child.
Well, in this, so I have a lot of questions about the STEMuli because notice that they took an old campus. That was an old school, an old brick campus, one of those beautiful old buildings. And, but I have a question about what this means for seat time funding, because Alison, you and I have been tracking the whole seat time funding thing. So, Andy, I don't know if this is in your state, but
what is seat time funding?
What?
Seat time funding?
So basically they only get paid, the schools only get paid if their butts are in the seats. They call it butts, jeans in the seats funding. And so a lot of districts have gone through something called districts of innovation. And I always suspected that was to decouple the seat time requirements. And so I've also been seeing this push. I think they want to get maybe, morning and afternoon shifts in the schools. So then you can get more kids in there. And then you don't really have to worry about the actual butts in the seat funding. Then you can have more dollars coming in for each child. But I don't know. This is just something I suspect. But I'm wondering how this virtual school would work for the seat time funding, for one. Two, the accountability system. How do they do the virtual STAR prep? Because STAR is our standardized testing. They call it different things in different states. What does that look like? And these aren't questions that we can answer here, but just things to think about. They get money per student. They also get money from our property taxes fund the schools. And so I'm just wondering what this, what that means for funding. I
think it was always intended to go to the vouchers. I mean, I think that was the model, was that the weighted, particularly also there's weighting in the student funding in a lot of places, which
we have weighted average daily attendance and regular in the average daily attendance money. Yes.
This is more like students who are English language learners, students in poverty, students with IEPs. They get an extra allocation because their needs are greater than an average student, right? And so in that, like, there's logic in that. Like, I agree with that, but that money was only temporarily meant to go to districts. Ultimately, the plan would be that money would follow the child, is what they're talking about with the mastery program. Mm-hmm. The other piece of this is the value added model, or the testing, when they were talking like teacher pay for performance in some states, and they would use these VAM, the value added model, which is really an agricultural like modeling process. And my gut has always been, that's for the computer programs, that value added model, it's intermediarily for the teachers, but in the end, it's going to be when I have my digital voucher and I'm using STEMuli and I log into Clever, which math tutoring program gets the most impact data, improves the impact data the way it's supposed to. And that is what the vouchers are going to be for. And that is what the value added model is going to be for. It's like, which of the 20 different online services that are you using is getting the return that they want on their math social impact bond. Now, I don't know how they'll split it with the bricks and mortar school. Like maybe they'll split it half and half. Like, I don't know. But I think that's this transition point. Like we're in the middle, like this 10-year transition plan.
Well, it's funny you say that because the biggest champion of the value added model, which in Dallas ISD they call it TEI, Teacher Excellence Initiative, was brought there by Todd Williams and the Commit Partnership. So they're the biggest cheerleaders of that. Interesting. And the Gates Foundation, they tried to do that teacher performance pay for years. They spent $575 million on it, and 2 decades later, they were like, okay, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It'll never work. But yet they still continue.
Computer programs.
It would work for that. Yes. If you reduce, you reduce the kids and the teachers to data points. Oh yeah, it'll work.
Well, then that's the thing that the value added model really introduced is, and I think in the interview I had seen, you had talked about this fixation on data that has been increasingly going. And that is partly what I've seen as even schools that aren't working on a value-added model are moving more towards a data-driven way of deciding how curriculum should go. And so I feel like, in my mind, I feel like we've already passed through those sections of like standardized testing, because standardized testing, to me, seems to lay the groundwork for standardized education, because over the last 3 or 4 years in science, they've been trying to move in terms of doing NGSS, next generation science standards. They've been trying to essentially tell science teachers, no, we all have to teach from the same book in the same order so that we can see, what's working. Because
apples to apples.
Working at one school with students who are primarily EL. Somebody else is working in a different school with completely different, group, but they want to find that kind of perfect standardized educational set that can collect as many students and move them along. And we're essentially the ones who are implementing it, because we're essentially training the computer that's going to replace us with that. So
exactly.
This is, I feel like we've already passed standardized testing, like charter schools for me feels like last year, 2 years ago. Now they've already moved through that game, and they've already even moved through, because I feel like the collectors here of the seats in the butts is Pearson. Is like, they are the ones who are going to now be able to gather up the contracts from the government about, we'll be giving you that seat time, because we're not going to have seat time. We're going to have eyeball time. We're going to have data time. And so seat time is going to be gone over the next several years, because it's really going to be about logins and who has that many people logging in. You can collect all that time. I do it already on Zoom. I get to see who logs in, when they logged in, when they logged off, what they said in the chat. I get to see it, and Zoom gets to see it. So it's not there's no but anyway, it's not just about privacy. Mm-hmm. So I feel like the money, to the extent that money is going to be there for education, the private-public partnership is going to be consumed by the private, and they're going to eat it all. They're going to take everything.
Exactly. Right. It's totally an access point, and to cook the books and to skirt any kind of transparency, and all these elected bodies, they're just puppets. They're figureheads. They're really not making decisions that they think they're making, and so the whole process is so corrupt.
And I do believe they know what they're doing. I believe even Mayor London Breed knows that she's the mayor of San Francisco, which is a Silicon Valley city. And I do believe she knows enough that when she says, oh, we've got to reopen the schools for the kids. No, we're going to reopen the schools and make these places, Silicon Valley data collection centers.
Yeah. I mean, our mayor is all over that nonsense. Mm-hmm. And their innovation plan, not very innovative.
What was, Lynn, your the reopening of schools? Or did any schools reopen? I heard Texas was more open-minded about opening schools.
Yes, so we did. And so all we did was we had a staggered opening. So the younger ones started first in August, and then the junior high and then the high school opened a few weeks later. So yeah, we did open, or maybe September, I think. It was delayed, and we've worn masks, and we had the plexiglass shields, which they finally got rid of those after we complained so much. They were using them I used them to scrape the snow off the windshield of the car and did a nice video on that. So I mock them at every turn because there's no science involved in it. But yeah, opening, we've been in person, but see what happened was because the quarantine protocols were so crazy and the parents knew and the kids knew, if I get COVID, then I'm not going to be able to play my sport or do my extracurricular activities. So I'm just going to go ahead and go virtual so that I can reduce my chances of not even getting COVID. It had nothing to do with getting COVID or being at risk. It was that somebody around them tested positive and then they'd be forced into quarantine. So that game went on all year long. And so they got a lot of virtual students because of that. They also lost a ton of students. So like maybe 1,500. My district has about 37,000 students. Dallas ISD has 150,000 students roughly, and they lost a ton of kids. So that means that they still got the funding from the governor that they, under the pandemic. So they got their money. Ours was about $10 million that they got, regardless of whether their kids were logging in, showing up, or any contact with the students. They were still getting funded. That's all they really care about.
I make this one thing about law students, because I was out with Neil Fulman today, who is the one Philadelphia teacher that I found who's standing up to what's happening here. And he's a high school teacher too. And what he was saying was that the reason he's actually been put on unpaid leave, because he did not think that the conditions under which the tiny little bit of school that was going to happen were humane at all. And he couldn't in good conscience participate in it. So, but he said that it was really like the mental health of his kids, and he was actually in, I think, like a special admit high school, but he said, even his most engaged learners had just checked out, and after the whole year, he just saw the level of devastation. And I think he was really outraged on the one hand that in going back, that there were no supports for transitioning kids back or dealing with the harm that had happened over the course of the year. And, I said, well, we have to just be cautious because we know that manufactured trauma is creating markets for mental health impact investing, right? Like we know that these teletherapy, if we think that they're after mentors for actual cognitive learning, the same vulture systems are after kids' behavioral health. And that's a whole nother data set. So like, how does one both try to come at supporting these kids and healing from this, whatever happened, the traumas of the past year in a way, but also protect them from these markets forces that it literally is a fracking system of their soul, right? And they knowingly caused the harm so that then they could swoop in and provide quote unquote services that are likely to harm them again. And it's so twisted, but very few people understand the market dynamics in that you could create a market in harming children. But it's there. I don't think anyone can deny that it's there. So, anyway, we're hoping to sort of organize some folks in Philly to start talking about it, right? But it's hard.
Yeah, those who come out and say, oh, these mental health issues that have arisen from the pandemic, where were they? Because I was saying that in April of 2020, when the schools were shut down and the kids are just, they're in their online. I mean, it was pathetic. So my son would check into he was in his brother's room because I didn't want him sleeping in the same room. He's on his device all day because sleep disorder. And so he would go into his brother's room. He's in college, and he would log in and I wouldn't see him. He'd come out for his feeding and then he would go back in. And it was pathetic that this is okay. And the risk, and that was all completely inflated the risk on children, which we knew from the beginning. We knew, I knew, but they still perpetuated the myths and padded the numbers. They were doing that in Dallas. On the mental health thing, the misconception is that suicides are up. We did have a suicide in our junior high, one of the virtual learners, but as a whole, suicides are not on the rise, but mental health issues are. And so they found that there were a lot of kids who were experiencing all kinds of issues in school that got a nice break from that. And so parents figured out, okay, something was seriously wrong. And now they were addressing it because the kid was right there in front of them. And we've had a lot of parents say, like there's one mom, she went before our board and she said, I finally figured out my straight A student couldn't read. And she has 6 kids. She pulled her kids out and she's figuring something else out. But it woke her up to what they were not learning in school and how much they were relying on the iPads and devices and, iStation and all of these.
With the game, you don't have to read very much.
No. Right.
I mean, that's
right. We can just Google the answer. Why do you need to read? That's the mindset. But so mental health issues are up, and that is an access point for more SEL. So I do social emotional learning in my Google alerts, and I just have pages every day. SEL, all across the nation. Oh gosh, all the learning loss and the stress and all the things from the pandemic. We got to double down on the SEL. Well, that's just another access point for data collection, behavioral data, private data.
And Lynn, you said when your schools did return, did you all do what SF schools have done, where they have a virtual classroom taking place as well, simultaneously alongside in-person students? Do you know about that as well?
Yes. And so they were doing that, and I couldn't remember what they called it either. It was asynchronous or synchronous. But so what my son found is that he would have to log in person because they're wearing the masks, and they've got the riot shields is what we call them, and they have this black strip across the top. So if you've got layers of students in front of you, you can't see or hear. So he would log in virtually in person from his little cubicle. It was a joke. And then he had one teacher behind the whole plexiglass thing around her desk with 2 masks. And the kids nobody's interacting, nobody's touching anybody. It's just insane. Absolute insanity. And it just kept getting more and more insane. I went to a school board meeting in a different district last night, and they had all the trustees 6 feet apart, but everybody's wearing their cute, coordinated masks. And then all the parents in the audience are sitting, they only gave them enough seats for every seat to be 6 feet apart. And so it looked like, I don't know, but it was standing room only all around the perimeter.
Right? It looks like the STEMuli audience, although they were closer together.
Yeah, right. And I thought, well, what if you come as a couple? You just sit 6 feet apart because the way the chairs, at least my school district, we have these old, this 100-year-old auditorium that, you can sit by each other. So it's all political theater. It's complete bullshit. And everybody's just, this is just the new normal. Totally normal. Don't
understand the human capital bond part. And it's so deeply embedded in Dallas. That's,
mm-hmm.
And the edtech is feeding the bond markets.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine, though, that Texas is a lot open to resistance to that sort of culture, though, that is being perpetuated by the schools. Then here in the Bay, I think everyone here eats it up because it's liberal agenda of accepting that COVID is, we're going to die from, Jesus. What is the response? Is Dallas a mixture of conservatives and liberals, or a mixture of ideas around this? Just quickly.
Yeah, so Dallas is run by liberals, but the perception is Dallas is run by, so the liberals think that the conservatives run Dallas, but it's bananas because it's not. It's liberals. But if you go outside of Dallas in these rural areas, nobody's wearing masks. So if I go an hour outside or 30 minutes outside of Dallas, no masks. Mm-hmm. People don't care, except for maybe a Whataburger where, it's a corporate company, somebody might. But no, I mean, it's so interesting how the left views the threat and the right views the threat. But then we've got a Republican governor, so the left hates him and the right hates him because he had the authority. They've got the House and the Senate. He could have completely, he could have done what DeSantis did, and he didn't. So it's interesting. But he's
got loose.
So, what?
Got loose. Come on,
Right.
loose. They're not going to let that go on. Spelling there. Everybody's got to stay in line, you know?
Right. And so when you step back from party, and I'm sure you guys have all been able to do this, you can really see what's going on and how both sides, it's really not that different. It's just the issues that they use. I think the whole Hegelian dialectic it's constant. It's just always got the two opposing forces: problem, reaction, solution, problem, reaction, solution. We never get anywhere except for where they want us to go.
Yeah. The only other thing I wanted to ask is, because Kenny asked a question about biotech, and I thought about Microsoft in LA. Have you heard about the what do they call it, the Daily Pass in the LA Unified School District?
Well, Allison, you were talking about it on that, I don't know, I've listened to you so many times, I forget where, I don't know. Well, so Austin did the ID 2020, and so our Health and Human Services director in Dallas came from Austin, and I found this event that where he spoke on a panel, and they were talking about blockchain, and they always take a vulnerable population, whether it's special needs kids or homeless, and that's where they do these experiments or these pilots on. So they did that in Dallas, in Austin, but that's the what's it called? Is it ID 2020? Allison?
Yeah, ID 2020. Yeah, with unhoused.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But and then the one you were talking about, I don't know as much about that. It's the same idea.
I think so. But essentially Microsoft, which seems to be involved partly in this STEMuli thing, they're also got their hand in essentially the plan that LA is using for testing your vaccination status, your PCR test status, essentially your biomedical. So Microsoft has got their hands in all these different ways that data is being collected. So there clearly is going to be a synchronizing of these things and putting these all into the same spot.
Well, and
who will
IBM
get
is
there first?
Excelsior. And IBM is Excelsior Pass in New York. So STEMuli was both IBM and Microsoft, so both sides. Excelsior isn't yet in the schools, but it is part of the medical passporting system.
Well, and even with Microsoft, you mentioned LA, and Steve Ballmer, the former CEO of Microsoft, he came to Dallas, and doesn't he own the Clippers? Didn't he own? I think Ballmer is an owner of one of those stupid sports teams, but
his wife is part of Strive. Connie is part of Strive, on the board of Strive.
So he came to Dallas and he spoke at one of Commit's meetings, or this big production that they had. And Steve Ballmer came in, and whenever the Dallas Morning News writes about something, I know to pay attention, because they always brag about their ventures. And it was he didn't really say anything significant, but I know that he's tied to Commit and Strive together, as she said.
It's a dashboard. They have I can't remember if it's Social Solutions. So all of the tech companies are going to have the data dashboards for the analytics that will combine, all of the data analytics for behavioral and academic and social welfare data for families, because it's not just about the kids in the schools. It's actually about low-income families attached to those kids too, which is scary.
Mm-hmm. When you had mentioned the home visits earlier, and so Dallas ISD tends to be a breeding ground for all of these experiments, these human experiments. And so the home visits sound good, because you think, well, okay, these kids are missing, and we need to get them to come back to school. We need to find out what's going on with them. These teachers are pressured to knock on doors and get their students in the schools, or just go and it sounds great. Because when I was little, I remember my first grade teacher came to eat dinner at my house, which sounds crazy, but it was a big deal. But the teachers, that's putting a whole lot of pressure on these teachers, who a lot of them have their own children, and so they're asking them to go knock on doors and go into these communities. But we know it's not because what?
Probably. And report back, probably, right?
Yes. I mean, if a teacher showed up at my door, I can't even tell you what I would do. They know not to come to my door. But that it sounds good, but we know that there's a model behind it that has everything to do with this human capital market. So it's getting people to understand, because we have to use their terms or else we lose credibility. But when we use all those terms that people are not familiar with, then it kind of goes over people's heads. So it's a careful balance of using their words. And so I started a podcast called Social Impact, because I kept seeing that social impact. And I thought, they always take good words and they pervert them and they use. So I thought, okay, I'm going to turn the tables on them and figure out how to expose this, and then also not get shadow banned because I'm using their words. It's just like using the word innovation, hashtag innovation, hashtag AI. When I'm exposing all their stuff, I'm using their hashtags. And I can't tell you how many times has this happened to you, Allison, where you're exposing someone and then they like your tweet and they retweet it because they're so used to people lapping it up that they don't even realize you're mocking them and you're exposing them.
All exposure is good exposure, I guess, in their book.
No bad press.
Mm-hmm.
Kenny, you said you had a thought that you wanted to share?
A visual,
I guess. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these details, like to discuss, they go over my head. So I go back and revisit, do some research to understand. And I agree with you, Lynn. Like, we have to put it into like practical terms so people can understand, at least to engage them so they can do their own investigation, hopefully. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, like the image that came to mind when we were talking about this was this image of the Matrix, the human harvesting, right? Like, maybe we're not at a point where, it's like literal bodies being harvested, but it is for sure minds. And so, yeah, I mean, all these mechanisms of social control and, nudging, behavioral, engineering, all this stuff. And that's what I think about, these big spiders, like machines just harvesting my mind or the mind of other people. And so that's what we're up against, and, that's what we should be concerned, I guess. And because it is a scary thought, and I don't think some people, I've tried to have these discussions with people and I get a similar response, that's going to happen down the line. It's not happening yet.
Yeah, that's the way out there in the future.
I love dancing, right? Like, I love Latin sounds, and I follow a lot of things on Instagram. I've tried to fight Instagram; it hooks me, and it still nudges me. But the scary part is that I've started to see more often avatars of people dancing,
Oh, wow.
and so that is scary, because dancing to me is intimate. Like, the Latin sounds is intimate. Is one, two people dancing together, holding, touching, having some sort of intimacy and an exchange, of reading body language, reading, predicting what another person is. It's a human exchange, and so I'm seeing these avatars more and more. I've always struggled with, kind of following, social media, but more and more I'm seeing myself standing alone, and less people dancing together. And so that's what's at stake here, for me at least. And that's how I try to explain it to my mother, who may not understand all these technical terms, and as to why we need to, speak up, why we need to fight. And, because we are being harvested, and especially the younger ones, they're the ones that are going to be that, they're the seed for that future.
Yeah.
Wow. That hits home, Kenny. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I do think essentially public education needs to be flattened and leveled for this new education system to be rebuilt. And it may sound strange because I actually think they do need to destroy. The only thing that could have stopped this would have been us teachers collectively refusing the internet literally saying we're going to paper and pencil. That's the only thing that could have stopped this. And we would have had to all say it and been like, we're unplugging, completely, because we think that these forces out there have a pernicious intent that we're not going to let them collect you. So we're going to stop them here, and we're going to make it that much harder for them to build the remote workforce that they're trying to load you into. But if they can essentially, now teachers unions right now are doing the opposite of fighting. They are literally promoting the problem, and teachers are buying into it because they're buying into it. But I do believe that to me seems like the only place that at least we as a collection of education workers could have stopped it, because once they dismantle that, then we're all broken apart. Then the possibility of stopping the process has to come somewhere else, because I will actually say it's going to be outside of the education workforce sphere to do it once they essentially make it essentially an all AI place. So it could still be stopped by a collection of workers right now because we're collective enough. But unfortunately, we're a bunch of idiots and we don't know what's happening. And we're actually pushing something that we should be pushing forward something we should be stopping. But I actually do think the capitalists know that if the teachers ever got around to it, they could still stop this.
Right. Teachers and parents, there's more of us.
Yeah. And this is what teachers do say, though. It's really weird when I talk to teachers and say, well, this is coming. They go, well, I don't think it's come because parents are going to stop it. I'm like, well, how are they going to stop it if we're letting it happen? It's like, why are we not joining them and stopping it? So it's weird in some ways,
and most teachers are parents. I mean, that I know, they're parents. And so it doesn't make any sense, but they've divided us and they've distracted the PTA parents with all this bullshit that matters none. And then the teachers are, they're exhausted and all the things that are required of them.
Well,
yeah, you're right about the unions though, because I used to Allison and I locked arms with the unions for years, and I'd be at the legislature, and the Republicans would always be like, oh, those teachers unions, you can't fire a bad teacher, and that's none of that was true, but at the top, Randi Weingarten, she was on this, she was an early signatory with the Dallas ISD superintendent for this Reimagine Education deal in 2015. This is before he was even back in DISD. He was in Atlanta, the DISD superintendent. So Randi Weingarten is partnering with these, and I can't remember who else was on there, but she's essentially handing over the schools to these tech companies. And then now that the pandemic hits, then she's saying, oh, I'm going to defend these people, and we're not going back in the classroom until it's safe. And so it created this war. And then the districts are saying, well, we can't open. We don't even have teachers who will show up. I'm like, call their bluff. I guarantee you they would show up, because most of the teachers didn't want this virtual nonsense.
They did.
But,
that's where I believe that, at least in where I am, it's not like they wanted it, but they were perfectly yes, I see what Randi Weingarten has done, and I see what the union apparatus has done. But at the base, teachers as workers have gone in completely the wrong direction on this. They were not just dupes of their union bosses. The union bosses and teachers have been in lockstep on this question, and it has been very destructive. And that's why I would be like, I do see it as a union problem, but not a union problem just from the top. It's a union problem at the base of our workforce, where most teacher workers say to themselves, I'm keeping these kids safe by staying out of school. And it's teachers like you, Andy, or AJ, who say we should go back, that are trying to kill our kids, that are trying to
kill grandma.
Yeah. And they don't understand that the ground is being lit on fire as we stay out of here. the whole thing, the whole apparatus of in-person education, that we actually could potentially still control and have a future in, that's being taken out of our hands the longer we go remote.
So true. What do we need them for?
Right.
I mean,
and once they get us all behind the laptops, then I think I said this to Alison before, I'm no longer a Mission High School teacher. I'm a teacher in the Pacific Standard Time Zone. And just like these kids are going to be part of a global work, I'm actually then part of that global workforce. It's like, hey, they need you in Japan. And okay, I can't find a job here. I got to go work in Japan. I'll wake up at a certain time, teach English there or teach science there to people who want to learn English in Japan.
That's the thing. Some of my job seekers do it to fill in the gig work. And they do that. I have a lot of teachers come through the job ministry. They say, I will do anything but teach. They quit their job mid-year, their hair's falling out, they're miserable, and they say, I will drive Uber, I will work for Amazon, I will do, then they're forced into the gig economy. Ugh. And they're great teachers. They love the kids. They cry because they don't want to leave, but they're so miserable. And they can't, in good conscience, do what is asked of them to do to the kids. That happens too. Solutions. Do we have any solutions?
Well, I do think it's possible if teachers get our heads on straight. Like if in my dream world, my teachers at Mission would come back to school next year and refuse to do two things. They would refuse any of the health and safety demands that are being restrictions that are forcing the schools to adopt all these things where you're not allowed to share and you've got to be this much distance. We would literally scrap them and refuse to do them. And number two is we would literally refuse to have any online anything, any tech anything go in school. And none of this nonsense at this point, unfortunately, whether we think that computer education can enhance real in-person education, at this point, it is a life and death struggle. We cannot afford to have it in at all. We can't afford to sneak it in through the door. It's a Trojan horse. So we have to end it all. And we have to understand it's a battle. And so we have to see their tools coming in are a way of attacking us. And so we cannot be any compromise on this. So that would be the mindset we would have to enter into August. And I do think if we did that, I actually think we could make real inroads on the beginning of a fight. But beyond that, I don't see, at least at the education level for education workers, I don't see any other way other than that.
I pulled my son out after a horrible year. This is my third child, and he was totally stressed on this high stakes testing. And they were telling the kids that they wouldn't get promoted to the next grade if they didn't pass the test, which he wasn't even at risk for failing. So I pulled him out for 4th and 5th grade. I put him in a private school for 2 years to remediate him. He had about 10 or 11 kids in his classroom. Best decision I ever made. They had a 50-year-old curriculum that used to kind of mirror what I got when I was in school, because I knew kids that went there, and then we fed into the same junior high and high school. And those kids did really well in school because they had more of a phonics-based, reading program, and no tech, low tech. I mean, they have a computer room where I think they learn typing and stuff. They really don't use any technology. And I hooked up some parents who are thinking about purchasing that model and scaling it. So that because I think there will be a backlash of parents. But the sad part is that it's 10, 12, however many $1,000s a year. And some of these private schools for special needs kids and learning disabilities are $25,000, $30,000. People can't afford that, even with the voucher. And so it's unfortunate that the public schools, they talk about these really organic models like Montessori, but they're all co-opted by this sensory play tables and the edtech stuff. So they're not really Montessori models, but it would be great if we could have a return like what you're talking about, just a no tech school, because we know that that's not what kids need. They don't need technology. They're digital natives. They can have it at home, but at school, I really think that it's what they need is the old school stuff.
What are the blockchain people going to do, Lynn?
Right. What are they going to do with their kids? Well, and I wanted to mention that this is we were talking about how complicated this is there was he was a senator at the time, and he brought forth the Senate Bill 1318. It was this pay for success, social impact bond bill that passed. And then eventually the TEA commissioner hired a social impact bond director, a charter school guy. But that senator, who's now a congressman, his kids go to this elite private school in Dallas, and he's pitching this social impact bond where investors will make money on the math scores, the improved math scores. And I just thought, can you imagine if at this elite private school they were like, okay, we're going to bring in these bankers and these investors, and so every click your kid makes, they're going to make money on their. I mean, can you imagine them tolerating that? They would never ever accept that for their own children. But in the public school, oh, but those kids, they need this in the public schools. We're just this little petri dish and this experimental laboratory for them. They literally call our education reporting in Dallas Morning News, they call it an education lab. And it's funded by Todd Williams of Commit and some family foundation and some architecture firm that makes money off the schools. Like, that's who funds our education news in Dallas. So we have to be the news, like what you're doing here and what Allison does, what I'm doing. We have to be the news because the media it's all propaganda. Left or right doesn't matter. They're all working together.
Yep.
It's my mama's soapbox over here.
Well, I appreciate you guys making time because, Andy, I'm so appreciative of the stand that you've taken and being on the front line and really the belly of the beast of all of this. And
Eduardo, the guy over there in that box next to me.
Yeah.
He's up for me. He's right here.
You too. Yeah. I mean, I sort of despaired. I was already despairing of education like before all of this happened a year ago, all the health stuff. And I've been pulled back in.
Allison said when I first met her, and I said, I'm a teacher. And she goes, I'm done with teachers. She was honest about it. And I could tell I had months of work to do if I was really going to have a trust here, because she was burned hard with teachers. So Allison, whenever you said, hey, this guy's doing it, it means an extra special thing for me, because you were an unbeliever. You were like, I'm done with this group. And kind of, I'm now feeling a little bit done with teachers right now, because I'm looking for other else. And that's going to have to change. I know it. But right now, I'm going to find the allies where I can find them. And I don't think they're among teachers. I mean, AJ, and there's a few people I can name. But by and large, teachers have just drunk the Kool-Aid hard.
Or they snitch on you.
Yes, they do.
Yes, they do. They get rewarded for snitching.
Yeah.
They get to wear jeans on Friday. That's what they dangle the dumbest things over teachers, and they grab her. I'm like, oh my gosh, is it that easy? What can I dangle to get you to stop? So sad.
Well, I definitely appreciate being able to have this conversation and meet you, Lynn, too. And I've already my sister-in-law has already asked me for your email address.
Okay, perfect.
Lynn is fierce. Like I said, there are not that many people that came along for the ride this time around, Lynn, and Lynn is definitely one. And we went all the way down in the old Parkland debate room together.
Yeah, we sure did.
Yep. So
the deep state compound in Dallas, right?
Not just education; she's on the smart city stuff too. She knows the whole deal. So
my one trick pony.
Well, thanks for hosting us tonight, and I encourage people to revisit that STEMuli video at the end. I know you're going to embed it in, but watch it more than once because it's short, and I really packed a lot into this larger conversation of where is the future of education and this human capital surveillance and globalization, really, training really fourth graders up for this. So,
yeah. And
I want to thank you both for speaking up and being loud, because I think we ask about solutions. I feel like that's what we can do right now. Hopefully people will listen, and I'm listening to you too. Thank you, and hopefully we can keep talking shit.
Yeah, it was a long-term conversation. Yeah, thank you guys.
All right. Well, let's just conclude with the outro. What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes wherever you found this episode, or on our blog at what-s-left.webnode.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast / channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything that you've heard here, please share your favorite episode, rate, review, subscribe, turn on your notifications, jot down our YouTube channel before whether it gets shut down or not because of the information we're sharing. Please.
Nothing left.
Right. A new name.
You can find us on any of our platforms on Spotify, iTunes Podcast, Stitcher, Google Play, Bitchute, LBRY, Odysee, or YouTube, and now Telegram. Yeah, I forgot. Telegram. And if you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host Andy Lipson and Kenny Cepeda. And thank you for joining us, Lynn Davenport and Alison McDowell.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you all.